We're ready to start the 2025 college football season, and we're back on the Big Mountain with two very special guests.
Hey, welcome back to the Big Mountain. I am JY. This is my good friend Steve, and we have two very special guests with us. We have AD Klassy with Fresno State, AD Dickey with Boise State, two people we've talked to before. Awesome to have them together here. Want to talk about their institutions, universities, and kind of the future of college athletics. So, welcome, gentlemen, back to the Big Mountain.
Thanks for having us.
So let's get right into, I want to talk about the House settlement first. We finally have this sucker settled. It seemed like it took a little too long, but we're finally there. So we'd just love to hear from both of you. Jeremiah, we'll start with you here with Boise State. Just kind of your general thoughts on the settlement, kind of what you're focused there on with your institution coming out of that settlement. Then a little bit later, I want to talk about maybe more specifics in terms of revenue generation for you there at Boise State. But what are your focuses now coming out of that settlement that you guys have to deal with there at your institution?
First and foremost, we knew it was coming. And so we had a runway and really grateful for our team and the work that they did behind the scenes to create Bronco Pro and to set us up for success when it was approved. We knew it was going to get approved. It just was a matter of when. And so we were ready to roll. And, I think our preference would have been that it was approved a lot earlier in the process versus I think it ended up being into May, early June, and Garrett could probably speak to that. But, you plan the work the plan. And we were well prepared for when that happened. In general, I do think it provides some level of guardrails. Now, I think there needs to be more, and there's a lot more to that. And I also, wasn't a fan of the group of six. Now we say Power Five, but the group of six being brought in at the very end to help pay for it. I'm not sure we caused it. And so that bothers me just in general. The idea that we live in fear and in the final hours, all of a sudden we're responsible, and never had really a seat at that table in terms of what the settlement would be. And but we're big on playing the hand we're dealt. And, I'm not one for crying over spilt milk. It is what it is. It's what's next. We're going to play the hand. We're going to keep going. And we're off and running and very fortunate here at Boise State, 350 plus student athletes. They've all had an opportunity to sign in to, Bronco Pro. And I think it ties into our competitiveness and when you come to Boise State to compete for championships.
For sure. How about you there at Fresno State, AD Klassy?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to Jeremiah. I've only been here a year, and so I obviously had to move a little bit faster than Jeremiah did in getting us up and ready to go. But the reality is one of the things I've always enjoyed about college athletics is the business aspect of it. And so, guys like Jeremiah and we tend to think a little bit differently, and that's not an insult to our peers, but you always have to be thinking about how can we monetize this? How can we monetize that? Because even if the House settlement had not been coming through, at the end of the day, we all need the resources to invest and reinvest to win and create champions in life. And so, we're lucky to have some diversified revenue streams. I'm very fortunate to have a president that is very pro athletics, understands what the value is to the overall university. And so, like I said, we're prepared. We had a few different revenue streams come in, but I agree with Jeremiah. This adds some guardrails that did not exist in the past. Now, is it enough? Probably not, but that's why you're seeing things like the Scores Act come through. And listen, I don't believe this whole thing gets settled until we have true federal legislation that goes through.
Well, we're going to get back to that for sure. I want to hear maybe a little bit more of your comments on those. Two follow-ups. I'll get back to kind of that revenue generation piece there, Garrett, but I want to go back to something that you said, JD, in terms of bringing in the G6 kind of late in the game. We had Commissioner Butterly on. He's been a pretty loud, if you will, advocate about how that process really went down. Did you feel that the G6 and even these other conferences were strong-armed a bit? Maybe that's a strong word. I don't know. Like kind of bringing you that late in the game. It was just like, hey, here it is, take it or leave it, and you didn't really have a choice. Like, can you speak to what your thoughts were on that a little bit?
Absolutely. And obviously I want to be careful with my words. It's hard to point to one individual and it's not judgment. These things are hard, there has always been this lack of unity in regards to the FBS. And obviously there's a number of different conferences, commissioners, athletic directors, presidents, And I think that created a lot of challenges, but I do feel a little bit that we were strong armed into something, and it's take it or leave it. And and I think you could say the same in terms of CFP expansion. I think you could say the same in terms of the power that the Power Four now has in terms of the 65% vote. I'm not one to live in fear. I like to define our own expectations. I think Garrett would say the same thing. We're very aligned. We talk all the time in regards to what this industry is and what we think it should be. And there's still a lot of work ahead. I mean, the House settlement, obviously there's positives, but like most things, yesterday's solutions are today's problems. And that's something that I think as athletic directors, it makes it very challenging. You have a lot of cooks in the kitchen and you're trying to do what's best, because that student athlete experience does matter to us. And preparing student athletes for life and how we impact our communities and our fan bases in general, there's a lot there. And I think that's maybe getting lost in this. And so I don't necessarily have all the solutions. But I am very vocal in regards to what I think. And I think that's part of what being an AD is nowadays. It's probably changed over the course of time. It's non-traditional, and we have to fight for what we feel is best.
Definitely, maybe a larger advocacy piece in your jobs than ever before. Kind of what you're speaking to there, JD. Let's get back to, Garrett. You mentioned kind of thinking differently, especially now this increased pressure for additional revenue generation, thinking outside the box. Of course, you had there at Valley Children's Stadium the first concert ever, I believe, at Fresno State. Massive success there. Shakira saw videos. Unbelievable, completely sold out. So that's one piece, but would love to hear from both of you, starting there with Garrett. Kind of what are you looking towards for the future? More concerts, or what else is there for you at Fresno State to help expand, your revenue base?
Sure. I think if you look at a lot of schools in our conference, JD had a concert this summer. I know Colorado State hosted PBR. And listen, I think I've been doing this for almost 30 years in college athletics. We've never monetized the low-hanging fruit. And so we have to take it a step further. But monetizing your facilities is the easiest piece, because we all live in areas or regions where they have a need, or we have a need to use 40,000 plus seat stadiums. And listen, I was responsible for bringing the first concert ever to Memorial Stadium in Lincoln, Nebraska with Garth Brooks a few years ago. And that's just that's that was hard work, don't get me wrong, but we should be monetizing. And we feel strongly in that revenue stream because we're in a completely separate market than San Francisco, LA, or Sacramento. We're the only football stadium in a 3 million person region. Like, we've had many conversations with Live Nation. This is going to be a sustainable revenue stream for us moving forward. But you have to take it the step further. We're looking at how do you, part of the reason you do unique uniforms isn't just because you want to get the student athletes fired up to wear a different uniform. It's so you can gain licensing and royalty revenue, and you'll see us be really unique and really, I guess, authentic, and really use how we use decals on our helmets this year, what uniforms we wear. We've never had that alignment here at Fresno State where, your fans would think of it as one way, but we think of it, how do you monetize that? And whether that's, if we're lucky enough to win this weekend and EJ Warner throws a game-winning touchdown pass, how do you get that helmet up on an auction site, autographed by him right after the game, where he can monetize that, where we retain some of that, and the rest of it goes back to the student athlete. And so we need to be creatively. I mean, we're having further conversations. Had a call today about how do we host a Mexican soccer league game at our stadium. The people from Boots in the Park, they handle country music musicians. They're interested in coming to Valley Children's Stadium, and so we're excited. I mean, we project it could be anywhere from a $2 to $3 million new revenue stream for us every year, and that may not make a big difference in the SEC or Big Ten, but that's an astronomical advantage for us in going to the new Pac-12.
That's great. Well, I'd love to hear from you, JD, here. Just some things I've seen, and you can set the record straight or go in a different direction. One thing, I've seen some rumors, I think just recently, They put out a schematic of maybe a build out around Albertson Stadium, whether or not that's something you're looking at. You're still in the planning and stages. Also, I know you've talked about private equity before quite a lot. I just wanted to check with you if that's still something you're looking at, interested in, and anything else there from your side of things.
For sure. And that was very well said by Garrett. I think it ties into, in general, how do we create new buckets of revenue because of what we're navigating? I think Garrett and my goal is always to create a sustainable model. We want to provide value, and ultimately, how do you take that value and then prepare your student athletes for life and provide the best possible fan experience? It's not to say that we're reprioritizing the department. We are still prioritizing it based off in our football program and the experience we're providing our fans. But then how do you utilize, say, outside events to justify some of the investments and create new capital projects that create new assets that then we can go out and monetize appropriately so, because there is not a bucket of money at the end of the rainbow with our states and with others. And it's not their fault. It just is what it is. And this is the hand we're being dealt. So when you think about private equity, and I need to clarify, I'm the one who did it to, I said private equity, really it's private capital. I can't, and I don't want to speak for Garrett, I can't go to the local bank and say, here, I have this great business plan and this great idea, and I can guarantee you X and get a loan. There's processes, and whether it's bonding and where you're at as an institution in terms of your bond capacity. And ultimately, I know here at Boise State, we have maximized every revenue stream possible. We have one of the best Learfield deals in the country. Every Learfield member that we currently have on our team has hit their goal going into this year. We're going to sell out Albertson Stadium for the second time in a row. 6 games, 6 sellouts. That's been a goal of ours since we arrived. We had the most donors we've ever had. We've had, the most ticket sales in general across all 18 sports. We sold out season tickets in basketball last year. These are revenue streams that are controllables for Garrett and I in terms of how we go out and monetize our operations. When you reach that ceiling, the onus is on us to find new opportunities. And so my goal is to create a sense of urgency, because it's now or never. There are teams like us that have a seat at a table or potentially an opportunity to have a seat at a table that maybe are different than others. And we have to go out and do the work. And so we've done a lot of work in terms of private capital and credit and what that looks like. It doesn't mean that I'm going to get the approval to do it, but my job is to give, whether it's 10, 20 different solutions to the challenges that we have financially, because we are in a gunfight with a knife. And ultimately our culture and our people, it matters, and to our communities, it matters. And we've had a lot of success across the board. And so, I need to find new ways of creating revenue. And so is it an entertainment district? And does that allow me to monetize acreage or square footage that I have that right now is parking, that I can then utilize to create new club seats or loge boxes or point of sale, additional point of sale opportunities, whether it's for our blue and orange store or concessions. It ties into a greater plan and purpose in how we are going to fund this model moving forward. The revenue share is an expense, and probably for the vast majority of schools, there's maybe 1 or 2 out there that they fully have it. But most are borrowing it, and some of us don't necessarily have those opportunities. And so we continue to find ways, whether it's concerts, special events in Stickle Sky Center, weddings. We've done weddings, funerals, office retreats. We have these stadiums, and it's one season. It's not seasonal anymore. It's 24/7. It's one season, and it never ends. So how are we utilizing these facilities that we are funding and investing in to create the experience that ultimately that hopefully that we have the best game day environment that you possibly can have?
You guys have funerals there, JD?
We have. There's a lot
Wow,
of those
that's
that
impressive.
they're. I mean, this brand probably same as yours. This brand is strong in this community, and we've had some donors that they wanted to have their celebration of life in Stickle Sky Center, and it's a good opportunity for us to connect with people. But it's been really cool. Those are the low hanging fruits. And Gary, you were well ahead of it, at Nebraska. But coming into a new place for me and as a new AD, we didn't even control Stickle Sky Center when I got here. And so that was
Yeah.
something campus was losing money on. I'm like, well, let me have it. And our team went to work, and now it's working on how do we get control over Extra Mile and make sure that we continue to utilize these facilities to fund this model. And I do believe there is a sustainable model that exists for us here.
Well, and I think to add on that is that, listen, we're both lucky to work at institutions where we have leadership that understands the value of athletics. And I said this earlier, but I think perfect example, two schools going into the new Pac-12. You have Boise State that I think, JD, you can fact check me. They were a junior college up until the mid 60s.
Yep.
And now they're the largest school in the state. Well, how did that happen? It wasn't just because they got lucky hiring Chris Peterson. It's because Chris Peterson was successful. And it was way before Chris Peterson. I mean, you had success with Coach Hawkins and the Coach Cutter, right? All that before there. And they reinvested in football and they created that. And that wasn't just part of the student athlete experience, part of the student experience. And so they didn't just think, well, wow, we hired 3 great coaches in a row. No, they reinvested. Gonzaga in basketball, they didn't become great just because they started winning. They kept reinvesting. And now look at the enrollment of that school. We're lucky to be at a school that our enrollment keeps increasing here at Fresno State. We haven't, we've been at that level, but we have to keep reinvesting to create that, because we know with enrollment declining at every school that athletics is a huge driver to the student experience. And so we are part of the holistic experience. So that's why we're looking for revenue streams. It's not necessarily about, overtaking our kingdom or overseeing our kingdom. It's more of, this is how we survive. Higher education's changing, enrollment's dropping everywhere. We have a huge piece of that puzzle, and we owe it to our universities to be able to monetize as much as possible and keep building on what they trust us to do.
That's well said. And that actually, and I'm glad you brought up that point. I just did move-in day earlier, and we are about to enroll our largest class ever, and we're very fortunate, like you all, that we have not hit that enrollment cliff. We continue to grow. And what is athletics? How is athletics utilized to be that front porch of our institutions and to tell that story and to represent something bigger than ourselves that does impact the fundraising and the connectivity and the engagement that campus has with donors and pipelines. And for us, we're trying, we're in the process of becoming a tier 1 research institution. And, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I 100% agree. Investment over the course of time has led to this brand that is very much impacting the number of out-of-state kids that want to come to Boise State because they know the power of the blue and they saw us last year and over the course of time. And so, I think that's that engagement or that connectivity that Garrett was talking about with having a president. We're going through a presidential search. It is imperative we have a president that sees the value in both athletics and academics and what athletics can do for the academic mission, because we still represent something bigger than ourselves and the communities we serve. And that makes it really exciting when you can have that alignment, because then the sky's the limit.
Appreciate all those comments. Steve, did you have any follow-ups there, or did you want to go to governance?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would just say I'm sure being in that CFP game didn't hurt your applications and your enrollment numbers at all.
Sure.
But yeah, let's talk about governance real quick. We waited so long. It was just something, we had the House settlement. The next shoe to drop was governance. I think JD, you touched on it briefly there with some changes, more power shifting. So could each of you just maybe speak briefly on the new governance structure and maybe how that affects your particular institutions moving forward and the future of college athletics?
You want to go first, Garrett?
I'll let you start, because I'll be honest with you. I tend to, I'm very on top of these things. JD's way more involved. I tend to worry about what we do at Fresno State and control the controllable. JD's more of a national voice on this topic than I am.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm not sure my voice is heard, and there's a balance, because you don't want to cry wolf, and that's something I have to watch. But in general, Garrett said it earlier, we're going to need federal support. And I still think there's some controllables in college athletics, under this current model that we need to do on our end. There are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, as I said earlier, and you have a lot of people that care, and legacy is important, and the impact that we're having on these student athletes and in our communities. And so the onus is on us that we have to figure out solutions that can work for majority, if not all, of the institutions that are FBS. Most recently the SCORE Act, and in general, I think there's a lot of positives to the SCORE Act. We have to get bipartisan support, and going to DC this summer, being able to talk to our various legislators and those that represent our states. There's some value in that. The federal government has a lot on their plate, and I'm not sure where we, we're not one, but are we last on the list? Are we mid? But we know that this impacts a lot of communities and states, and so if rightfully so, it has risen, and that gives me a lot of hope. It's going to take a team to find a solution, and there's some big things out there, such as in general, and maybe this doesn't tie into legislation, but collective bargaining, and how do we navigate our student athletes employees or not, and how is Title IX going to impact what we're doing, and what's the will of the federal government in that space, and knowing that most recently they said it's a priority. And so we're navigating a lot, and we're trying to effectively lead into those that are supporting us in DC to make sure that they have the right narratives, but those narratives also can change. We know we need antitrust protection, but there's some nuances to that. And that's not something that, it's not a general statement. We need to make sure that we are thinking through each step of this process to make sure that everyone has a seat and everyone is positively impacted. And it's not just the power two versus the other two versus whatever we want to call us. There are 136 schools at the FBS level. Football is driving the majority, if not all, the change. Basketball is a close second behind it, and we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we create some level of unity so we can get federal support and take that next step. House created the guardrails, but we cannot continue to take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And we have to figure out ways to operate, and there are much smarter individuals than I am. Excuse me. I'm good at screaming from the mountaintop of the things I don't like, but it is really hard, and it's not a judgment of anyone who's involved, because I get it. Commissioners need to do what's best for themselves and the schools they represent, ADs the same way, presidents, so on and so forth. That's where I think that the SCORE Act and other things are bringing us together more and more, and there is always a solution. We just have to work really hard at finding it.
And I would say, listen, I mean, we have so many states that have different laws that, the preemption of state laws is that has to change. I mean, we all have to operate by the same rules. And it's disappointing that, power to the states that have that ability to go there and change laws in their favor to help their athletic departments. But the reality, that's not a sustainable model moving forward. And I think the last thing I would add to that is that at least the SCORE Act tries to protect Olympic sports. And I think a lot of times we always make decisions based off football and basketball, and I understand why, it's obvious. But at the same time, we don't think about what the impact it has as schools start minimizing Olympic sports, dropping Olympic sports. And when we look up 4 years from now and Germany and Russia have more gold medals than us in the Olympics, people are wondering what happened. The reality is we don't have a robust Olympic training program here. That is college athletics. So does funding come from the government to help us fund those Olympic sports? I think, we need to look at this thing holistically and not just in tunnel vision. And I think that's, unfortunately, the NIL piece, a lot of the revenue sharing piece, that was done to protect the highest profile sports. And listen, Jeremiah and I, we are always going to invest in those sports because those are the sports that bring the greatest visibility. But the reality is we have we owe it to all of our student athletes to protect them and build their futures the best way that we can.
That's very well said, and a great point in terms of the Olympic sport programs. And in addition, I've told my team this, what has really changed with our why? Our job is still to prepare our student athletes for life. And I'll use football as an example. 80% of our football student athletes upon graduation, whether, they go to the NFL, they end up in Boise, whether they were from here or not, and the majority or not. And how they're impacting our community and serving. We still represent something bigger than ourselves. And it isn't just paying student athletes and the competitiveness and whatever else. It's how we're effectively serving our community. And that starts with how we serve our student athletes. And so having that holistic approach that Garrett was mentioning, that needs to be a priority. And, you look at the 18 sports that we we represent, and I've promised him I'm not dropping sports. I do not see value in that. And that's something, because of what Garrett was saying, that pulls at my heartstrings. You know, we all had a choice at one point in time whether to go college athletics or professional sports. And, you know, and there's a reason I chose college athletics. And so some of us, like Garrett and I and others, we're holding on for dear life for the sake of the kids and how we represent them.
Well, guys, I have one last question about the congressional action, because you guys rolled right into that. It was something we were going to bring up. But there's an attempt with the SCORE Act and some other legislation. Yes, that they want to protect the student athletes and their rights, which is awesome. They also want to protect the schools. I mean, especially a lot of public schools. And be able, like you guys said, be able to still offer Olympic sports and do all this without going broke. But is there an element that maybe they need to protect the schools from each other as well? Because if it's just the survival of the fittest, the biggest, richest schools are going to take all the power. They're going to dominate. The Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, Michigan, they're always going to have more money. And if they can strong arm the smaller schools to do whatever they want, there's not much you guys can do. So do you want to see an element of that, of the protection of keeping a level playing field and keeping everything under a big tent? Should that be part of legislation?
I mean, listen, there's always been discrepancies on who receives the most revenue, and that's okay. Really, that's part of life. That happens in every level of sports. But the reality is that, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Why do people love sports? It's always been, why is the Miracle on Ice so great? It's the underdog aspect, and that's why I think where a lot of us are fighting the tournament ratings for the NCAA tournament. It's not a billion-dollar contract, because the Final Four always consists of what, Power Five teams. It's because it's the first and second round, the Cinderella story. And so, I think we're not fighting to be, boy, would I love to have the same TV revenue as the SEC and Big Ten? Absolutely. But I'm a realist as well too. But at the end of the day, they can't minimize what we're doing on this level, because Fresno State and Boise State have a great history of pulling off upsets and beating Power Five teams on a pretty consistent level. And that's really part of our brand. So we know it can be done, and it will be done. So, I think they're really going to ruin the product if you think these two conferences are going to be superior to everyone else. And I think TV ratings will show it. I think this country really enjoys rooting for the underdog. And I don't think we ever view ourselves as the underdog, but the reality when it comes to resources, we are the underdog. And we are always going to fight for our place in college athletics.
That was awesome and very well said again. And, I look at this last year, and this was the first time, essentially the group of five, group of six, whatever we want to call them, had a seat at the table. And, and I do think that gives you hope. And I do think a lot of our fans tune into the CFP games, after we lost, like that they're watching because it's like, we're one of them. And I understand there's discrepancies, but I think the fandom piece is getting lost in this, and the communities that we represent. And I think there's power in numbers. And so should it be in the SCORE Act, and should that be discussed? I think there's things that they can do that ultimately push us or move us towards that direction, that we develop some level of unity. We have templates to follow: Major League Baseball, NBA, NFL. I do believe that Cinderella piece is important. I believe what we represent is important. And I think that sometimes you got to be careful what you wish for. And, I think if you start eliminating, schools and conferences and whatever else, I think that's gonna really impact the viewership and that connectivity. I mean, I'm on social a lot. You guys know this, and everyone is talking about college football. How does that change if we start creating other levels and so I do think that pushes us to find a solution that fits all. And I think there are solutions that exist. I'm a proponent of promotion relegation, but is that something the federal government should get involved in? No, I think there's other solutions, and I'm not sure the NCAA is the solution, but the CFP has power, and I know that there's always a solution.
Well, gentlemen, I thank you so much. I know you're two very, very busy individuals. This has been an awesome conversation. I could go on and on and on, but we're going to have to wrap this up. Before we do, we're a college football podcast, so
Yes.
I have to get your opinions about your two college football teams. So first, let's start with Boise, the reigning Mountain West champion here, looking to go a three-peat here at Boise State. I want to hear what you have to say here. I have high hopes for this team. I picked them to be in the championship game yet again, JD. What do you think's going to happen this season?
So you may not like my answer.
Oh.
When I look at the last, I believe 17 years we've been picked, and obviously we haven't won it every year. And this was the first time I believe we won it 2 years in a row. And I think that's a testament to the competition and schools like Fresno State and others that everyone goes out to win, and winning is hard. And pressure is a privilege. And I know we have a bullseye on our back. Obviously there's a lot to that, in terms of realignment, but also being the reigning champ and going to the CFP. And so, for us, it's not necessarily starting at the top of the mountain. There are things that we needed to do this offseason, and I'm really proud and grateful for someone like Spencer and how he leads. And our mentality always is 1-0. Like, the only thing that I concern myself with, it actually frustrates me sometimes because our staff and others will start talking about, we play Notre Dame this year. And I'm like, guys, USF, that is all I'm concerned about. It's 1-0 mentality. I'm sure Garrett's the same way with his game. So these games are so important to us. And so I do believe we have a great team. We have had this foundation of success. We're coming off an unbelievable season, the best season in our history from a data standpoint in terms of what we were able to accomplish, and obviously having the seat at the CFP table. But it's what's next. And this is a new chapter, and we got work to do, and every team's going to want to beat us. And that's a point of pride for us. And I'm really excited. We leave next Tuesday for South Florida, and I'm really excited to see South Florida. I don't really pay attention to who we're playing. I pay attention to us and control what I can control. And I'm really excited to be there. They have a great program, and obviously in the American, and one of the top teams in the American. And I think I believe it's on ESPN2, and it's I believe the first game of week 1. Understanding week 0's coming up, but how awesome! I mean, this offseason flew by. It feels like I was standing on the Fiesta Bowl, turf, kicking off, and all of a sudden now we're back to regular season. And it's what's next. So it's 1-0, and I'm excited for USF.
All right, Garrett, how about Fresno State?
The Bulldogs.
Yeah, listen, I mean, the one thing I will tell you is that Coach Entz has brought a different swagger to this program. I mean, our guys are bigger. It's a different style from the Tedford era. His saying is toughness wins. You're looking, he always talks about big people have always pushed around small people in life. And so he's put a huge emphasis on strength and conditioning and nutrition through our program. And listen, a lot of new coaches, a lot of roster turnover. But the one thing I'm most excited about is that, I probably talked to 50 different coaches before we hired Coach Entz last year, and anyone can give a great interview. But when Coach Entz came in, he had a 50-page document, detailed, not that something he took to 20 interviews. It was detailed for Fresno State, and he's living up to it. He's recruiting the Valley, the structure he has, the plan he has in place. That none of that guarantees victories, but it definitely minimizes your ability to make mistakes when the bright lights come on. So I love the structure. He's an incredible partner. He's really integrated himself with the community. His coaches that aren't from here have done the same thing. And listen, he's really energized this community, and we're excited, and we'll line it up. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I'm not a football coach. I'm an AD. My job is to give him the resources he can to win championships. His job is to go out there and win those championships. So if you ask me, I'd say we're never going to lose again, but I know that's not reality. So we're just going to roll the ball out there against Kansas on Saturday, and we'll see what happens.
As JD says, 1-0, man, 1-0, and we'll just keep doing them and adding them up. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Our first tandem AD interview. So many great discussion points, so many interesting topics. Could have gone on and on, but we're going to let you go. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Looking forward to coming back when you change the name to the Big Pack.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Garrett, good luck this weekend. We'll be pulling
Thank
for you and following. So thank you, guys. Very grateful.
I got to tell them one thing real quick.
Yes.
Okay, so we just had our 2-year anniversary, guys, And in our first year, you guys made our Mount Rushmore, the big Mount Rushmore in our first year, both of you, and the Big Mountain Player of the Year, Ashton Genty. So this year, in year 2, we have a new Mount Rushmore. So you guys, plus Ashton Genty, plus 2 other folks, are moving to our first ever Hall of Fame. So you
That's
guys are in our first class of the
Wow.
Big Mountains Hall of Fame, along with Ashton Genty, the Big Mountains Player of the Year.
There
last
you go.
year.
There you
All
go.
right, I'll be waiting for my gold jacket in the mail.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great evening.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Dang.